I never thought I'd be the kind of guy standing behind the counter of a dusty old bookstore, nervously fingering the edge of a hardcover, heart thudding over a problem I didn't even know how to name. That's where I saw her again, my friend's sister. But she wasn't the girl I remembered from high school. She had that same familiar laugh, soft but full, but now it carried a weight I couldn't place, like it had survived years of storms and come out steadier on the other side. The bell over the door rang, and she walked in. She always did that. Her presence filled a room before she even spoke. Today she wore a tailored trench coat, slightly rumpled at the elbows, and a scarf that smelled faintly of lavender and rain. I froze for half a second, then reminded myself to breathe. I wasn't supposed to notice these things. "Hey," she said, tilting her head like she was scanning the shelves, pretending she hadn't just noticed me staring. "Hey," I replied, my voice catching for no reason at all. I watched her move between the aisles with an ease that was almost hypnotic. She picked up a book on 20th century architecture, ran her fingers over the spine, and then set it back like it had betrayed her in some way. I wanted to say something clever, something that would make her look at me and laugh the way she used to when we were kids, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I busied myself arranging a display of journals, pretending the titles mattered. That's when she walked past the counter and leaned down, almost brushing against me, and murmured, "Do you have a moment?" Her voice, soft, low, intentional, made the hair on my neck stand on end. "Sure," I said, trying to act casual, my fingers trembling as I held a stack of notebooks. She picked one up, frowning slightly, then met my eyes. There was a pause, just a beat, really, but it stretched longer than it should have. I felt it, the quiet crackle in the air, like a room that's too warm and still, waiting for someone to make the first move. She smiled, small and knowing, like she had noticed something about me I didn't even know I was showing. I just needed a place to sit for a minute," she said, glancing around. "It's been a rough day." The way she said it, it wasn't a complaint, exactly. It was a confession, almost hidden behind the words. I didn't know what to do. Offer her a chair? Ask why? Somehow, just standing there, I realized she wasn't just anyone. She was her own gravity, pulling me in even when I thought I was standing still. "Here," I said finally, pointing to a worn armchair by the window. She moved closer and sat, but instead of curling up with the book she had selected, she hesitated and then took my hand. Not aggressively, not in a way that demanded anything, but with the kind of quiet trust that made my chest tighten. "I feel safe with you," she whispered. I froze, not because of the words themselves, but because of the weight behind them, the subtext, the way they hovered in the space between us like something alive. I wanted to respond, but my throat was suddenly tight, and my mind was full of 1,000 wrong things to say. Instead, I just held her hand, careful not to make it awkward, careful not to break the fragile electricity that had sparked between us in that pause. When she let go a few moments later, I realized I couldn't stop thinking about it. That hand, that whisper, that half-smile she gave me before she looked back at the shelves. Something had shifted, something unspoken, and I was already caught in it. And somehow, I knew I'd be standing here tomorrow, hoping for the same crackle, the same impossible, magnetic pull. The repair shop smelled of oil and metal, a stark contrast to the lavender and rain scent I associated with her. She had asked me to help her with her old motorcycle. Something minor, she said, but I could tell by the way she rubbed her temples that it had been a long, draining day. I knelt beside the bike, loosening a bolt, trying not to stare as she hovered nearby. She didn't say much, just occasionally handing me a wrench or muttering a technical question that I had to ask her to repeat. Her voice was calm, almost clinical, but there were cracks in it, tiny slips that made her seem smaller, softer, less invulnerable than she usually appeared. She leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching me work. I caught her glancing at my hands as I tightened a nut, then quickly looking away when our eyes met. It was subtle, but I noticed. The faint tremble in her fingers when she set down a tool, the way her shoulders tensed as if carrying some invisible weight. "You don't have to do this," she said finally, a little too quickly. I could manage. "I know." I replied, keeping my voice even. But it's faster this way. She sighed, a sound that was more like an exhale of everything she'd been holding in. For a moment, she just stood there, head tilted, watching the sunlight catch in her hair. I wanted to say something to make her laugh, to lighten that tension, but I didn't. I was too busy memorizing the small details. The way her eyes softened when she let the tension slip, how her laugh, rare as it was, could catch you by surprise, or the faint shadow under her eyes that hinted at nights spent worrying, working, living. I handed her a rag to wipe her hands, and she took it with a hesitant grip. Our fingers brushed. Just that tiny contact made my stomach twist, a sharp, familiar pull I couldn't ignore. She looked down, as if ashamed of the moment, or maybe ashamed of letting herself feel it. "You've been doing this a long time, haven't you?" I asked, nodding toward the bike. She laughed softly, the sound almost breaking through the armor she kept around her. "Longer than I should have, probably," she said, but her eyes didn't meet mine. Instead, she fiddled with the rag, twisting it in her hands. There was a vulnerability there I hadn't seen before, a quiet surrender that didn't need words. I wanted to tell her something, anything, but the words felt heavy. Instead, I just stayed close, letting the silence stretch, letting the small, unspoken connection between us thrum in the warm, dusty air. Then, just as I was about to reach for another tool, she tilted her head slightly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Our hands touched again, more deliberately this time. She didn't pull away. I don't usually," she started, then stopped, swallowing whatever confession she'd almost let out. And just like that, the space between us became electric. Not loud, not obvious, but charged in a way that made me catch my breath. I didn't know what she'd meant to say, and I wasn't sure I wanted to know yet. For now, it was enough to hold that fleeting touch, to see her hesitate and let me see her pause, even just for a heartbeat. She finally stepped back, giving me a small, guarded smile, but I could still feel the pull of that moment, vibrating in the air long after she turned away. The rain had been hammering against the windows for nearly an hour, and the small cafe smelled like wet coats and burnt coffee. I hadn't expected her to show up tonight, but there she was, brushing rain from her hair, cheeks flushed from the cold, and smiling faintly like it was nothing at all. We ended up at the same corner table, the kind tucked against the wall where nobody really noticed us. I pored over the menu but didn't order, distracted by the way she pushed a lock of damp hair behind her ear, exposing the subtle lines around her eyes. She looked older than me, yes, but also impossibly alive in a way that made me feel like I'd been standing in shadow until now. "I can't believe you remembered this place," she said softly, glancing around as if the world outside was moving too fast. "I've been here before," I said, voice low, trying not to betray how glad I was that she was here. "But not like this." She laughed, a small, guarded sound, and for a moment our knees brushed under the table. Not enough to make a scene, but enough to make my chest tighten. I wanted to pull back, afraid it was too much, too soon, but something in her posture told me she wanted the proximity too. We talked quietly, and then the cafe phone rang, startling both of us. Her expression shifted almost imperceptibly as she glanced at it. She shook her head and let it go to voicemail, muttering something about it being late. A friend, I realized, or someone who could have intruded into this strange, fragile bubble we'd created. For a while, neither of us spoke. The rain drummed a steady rhythm against the glass, and the heat from the small heater at our feet did little to warm the tension coiled between us. I caught her fingers tapping nervously on the table. I didn't expect to see you tonight," she said finally, and I could hear the hesitation in her voice, the almost confession lurking behind the words. "Neither did I admitted. And then, without thinking, I reached across the table, just enough to lightly brush my hand against hers. She didn't pull away, though I could feel her hold herself back. We stayed like that for a long moment, our eyes locked, and I thought I saw something flicker there, something unsaid, dangerous, but tender. The kind of thing you shouldn't act on, but can't ignore. A sudden notification pinged from her phone, and her gaze flicked down. I saw her hand tremble slightly as she picked it up. Her ex, maybe, or a colleague reminding her of obligations. Whatever it was, the outside world intruded, and the fragile closeness shattered almost immediately. I drew my hand back, heart thudding like it had just been handed a warning. She tucked her phone into her bag, and when she looked up, she was smiling, but the edges were tight, cautious. I should go, she said quietly. Early morning tomorrow. We stood together, awkwardly close in the narrow space near the door. The rain had slowed, just a little, but the air between us still felt thick, charged with the thing neither of us wanted or dared to name. And just as she reached for her coat, I opened my mouth, ready to say something I didn't fully understand myself, and then stopped, because we both knew that some lines, once crossed, couldn't be uncrossed. Instead, we stepped out into the rain, side by side, close enough that our arms brushed for a heartbeat. And even as the droplets soaked us, I couldn't stop thinking about that almost touch, that almost word, that fleeting, electric pause that hung between us like a secret we weren't ready to share. The hotel lobby was nearly empty, the low hum of the heater and the occasional clink of a luggage cart filling the silence. We'd both been waiting for an elevator that refused to come, and somehow that stillness had made everything feel heavier, like the air itself was pressing us together. She stood near the marble railing, coat draped over one arm, eyes tracing the patterns in the floor. I wanted to break the silence, but every word felt inadequate. So I stayed quiet, letting my hands fidget with the strap of my bag. Finally, she spoke, her voice low, almost brittle. "What are we even doing?" I blinked, caught off guard. Not by the question itself. It was obvious, maybe unavoidable, but by the way it made the world shrink to just us, just that truth, hanging there in the cold lobby air. I don't know, I admitted, voice hoarse, unsure if honesty was courage or cowardice. She let out a laugh, but it wasn't funny. It was sharp and fragile at once, like glass cracking under weight. "Of course you don't," she said. "I don't either." There it was, the unspoken acknowledgement of the line we'd been circling, the tension that had been quietly eating at us. I watched her shoulders slump slightly, a subtle gesture I'd never seen before. She wasn't trying to be strong. She was just tired. So tired. We stood closer than necessary, but neither of us moved. I noticed the faint tremor in her hands as she held her bag, the way her eyes kept flicking to mine, daring me to say something, anything, and yet warning me to stop before I crossed some invisible boundary. "I feel like we're pretending," she whispered, voice barely audible. "Like we can keep this little closeness without it breaking something." I swallowed hard. Her words weren't accusations, just confessions. She was unraveling, and I was right there, wanting to help but knowing there was nothing to fix, nothing that could be fixed. I can't pretend either," I said, letting the truth out in a whisper that felt louder than the empty space around us. She looked down at her coat, fingering the edge, avoiding my gaze. When she finally met my eyes again, there was a glimmer of something I couldn't name. Fear, longing, regret, maybe all of it at once. We didn't move closer, didn't reach for each other. We simply stood there, letting the silence stretch and swell, letting the weight of all the unspoken words press between us. Each second felt like it could shatter everything we thought we understood. "Maybe we shouldn't be like this," she said finally, almost to herself, almost as a warning, but with an edge that sounded like it was meant for me too. I nodded, but I didn't look away. There was a raw honesty in that small admission, a confession that didn't need to be spelled out, because the space between us had already said it all. She stepped back then, adjusting her bag, but I could see it in the set of her shoulders, the way her fingers lingered on the strap, how much she wanted to reach for me and couldn't. And before she turned to leave, she whispered something that made my chest tighten so much I thought it might break. "I don't know how to stop feeling like this around you." And with that, she walked away, leaving me staring at the space she had occupied, feeling the silence roar louder than any touch could have. I hadn't expected her to come back to the bookstore that evening. The sky outside was bruised purple, the last rays of sun spilling through the dusty windows like molten glass. She appeared in the doorway, hair damp from an afternoon drizzle, clutching a worn envelope. My chest tightened before I even recognized the movement. I, I found this, she said, voice tight, almost unsteady. She held it out to me, but not really. It was more like she was offering it to the room, to fate, to whatever was waiting for us in that quiet space. I took it carefully, feeling the weight of her hesitation. What is it? I asked, my voice quieter than I expected. She exhaled slowly, fingers curling around the strap of her bag, nails pressing into the leather. It's from a long time ago. Someone I lost. She didn't elaborate, and I didn't push. The bookstore felt suddenly smaller, the air heavy with memories she wasn't ready to speak aloud. I watched her closely, noticing how she shifted her weight from one foot to the other, how her eyes flicked to the floor then back up at me, like she was searching for permission to say more. Finally, she spoke, almost to herself. I never thought I'd see it again. I thought I'd moved on. I swallowed, trying to stay steady. Sometimes we don't really move on, I said softly, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. We just carry it differently. She looked at me then, really looked, and I saw it. The flicker of vulnerability she usually kept hidden, the jagged edges of a past heartbreak she never mentioned. For a moment, we just stood there, breathing in the same quiet air, letting the significance of it settle without words. I didn't know how to tell anyone, she admitted, almost a whisper. I didn't want to be a burden. You're not a burden, I said without thinking, the words tumbling out too fast, but they felt right. Not to me, not to anyone who cares about you. Her hand brushed against mine as she moved closer, tentative, like a moth circling a flame, and I didn't pull away. I noticed the way her eyes shimmered, unshed tears, relief, a mixture of both, and for the first time, I felt like I was seeing her fully, not just the confident, self-assured version, but all the cracks and hesitations she carried under the surface. She exhaled, a quiet, shaky sound, and I realized she had been holding it in, holding herself together for so long. The envelope trembled slightly in her hand as she passed it to me, and the weight of it, of her, of that past, made my chest ache. I didn't know I could feel this raw again, she said, almost embarrassed, almost afraid. It's like I forgot what it felt like to trust anyone. I nodded slowly, words failing me, letting the silence stretch just long enough for both of us to feel it. The tremor in her voice, the slight hitch in her breath, the way she lingered near me, all of it pressed against my chest like a quiet revelation. Then, with a soft, almost imperceptible smile, she leaned just close enough that I caught the faint scent of rain and lavender. I don't know why I'm telling you this, she whispered. And I realized, in that suspended heartbeat, that she didn't have to, that she had already told me everything simply by being here. The workshop smelled of engine oil and warm metal, the late afternoon sun spilling through the high windows in streaks of gold. I was crouched over a carburetor, hands greasy, when I heard her laugh, a soft, exhaling sound that made me pause, wrench in midair. She was leaning against the workbench, arms crossed loosely, watching me fumble with a stubborn bolt. You're worse at this than you think, she said, but her tone wasn't critical. It was familiar, intimate, layered with something unspoken. I looked up at her, and for a moment, the world narrowed. There was no need for words, no grand confessions. Just her presence, steady and real, like a lighthouse cutting through fog. I set the wrench down and wiped my hands on a rag, moving toward her. You've been quiet all day, she said softly, tilting her head. Thinking about something? Thinking about this, I said, gesturing vaguely between us. And how strange it is. Strange? She asked, eyebrows slightly raised. Yeah, strange and inevitable, I admitted, the words feeling more like a breath than a sentence. I wanted to tell her that I'd been caught in the gravity of her, that every almost touch, every pause, every shared silence had brought me here. But I didn't. I didn't need to. She already knew. She stepped closer, just enough that the air between us thinned. Her eyes softened, those faint lines at the corners glowing with quiet vulnerability. I noticed the faint calluses on her hands, the way she absent-mindedly twisted the edge of her sleeve, and it made my chest ache with recognition, not of romance, not of passion, but of knowing someone fully and having them know you back. Without thinking, my hand reached for hers, brushing the back of it lightly. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let it linger, her fingers shifting slightly to interlace with mine. It was a small gesture, intimate, and yet nothing dramatic. Perfectly ordinary, and yet it sealed everything that had been building between us. We stood like that for a long while, watching dust float in the sunbeams, letting silence carry the weight of years, choices, and unspoken confessions. No declarations, no promises, just mutual understanding and a quiet acknowledgement that whatever this was, it didn't need words to exist. "I think," she said finally, voice barely above a whisper, "we just needed to be here, like this." I nodded, squeezing her hand gently. The electricity that had crackled and stuttered through every moment of tension before had dissolved into something steadier, something that felt like coming home after years of wandering. We moved together instinctively, side by side, toward the workbench and sat. Our shoulders brushed. Our fingers stayed entwined. Neither of us spoke, because no words could improve on the simplicity of shared space, shared breathing, shared quiet. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the window panes, but inside, the world had slowed to this moment. Ordinary, but perfect in its honesty. And for the first time, I didn't feel the pull to explain, to clarify, or to define. I just felt her hand in mine, warm, steady, real. Finally, she exhaled a long, soft sigh, resting her forehead lightly against my shoulder, and I knew that nothing more needed to be said. We didn't move. We didn't speak. And in that silence, the truth had quietly settled between us, unshakable, unspoken, and entirely ours. I sit by the window now, years later, watching the rain trace rivulets down the glass. The workshop, the bookstore, the late-night cafe, all of it feels like a series of echoes, moments compressed into memory that I can still feel in my chest. She's there too, in all of them, in every pause and unspoken word. Looking back, I can see how quietly everything changed. I wasn't the same 20-something, fumbling through life and half-meant words. She wasn't the guarded, self-contained woman I first thought I understood. We both shifted, imperceptibly, slowly, like a sculpture being revealed under careful hands. We never declared love in the way people imagine. It wasn't fireworks, and it wasn't perfect. It was hand touches that lasted too long, silences that spoke louder than arguments, and small, steady acts of care that built an intimacy I'd never known I could reach. I learned to notice the tremor in her hands before she hit it, to hear the sigh that meant, "I'm scared," before she spoke it aloud. And she learned that I wasn't just a boy fumbling near her world. I was someone who could carry the weight of her past heartbreaks without breaking. Some days we still sit in the workshop, hands intertwined, letting the quiet hum of machines and sunlight fill the space. Some nights we talk softly, about nothing and everything, letting our stories weave together without forcing them into tidy conclusions. There's still tension, sure, the kind that keeps us aware, alive, but it isn't the sharp, desperate pull from before. It's steady, warm, and entirely ours. I realize now that love doesn't always arrive in grand gestures. Sometimes it grows in small, stubborn ways, in moments we almost miss. The shared glance over a pile of books, the brush of a hand across a greasy workbench, a laugh that escapes when the world wants silence. And in learning to be there, quietly, honestly, I found a way to love her that feels as real today as it did that first evening in the bookstore. And she has changed too. She doesn't carry the weight alone anymore. She lets someone in, not because she has to, but because she wants to. Watching her trust, slowly, carefully, taught me that patience isn't about waiting. It's about showing up, consistently, even when the world seems too heavy to bear. I smile now, running a finger along the spine of a book she once brushed her hand over, remembering the small sparks that brought us here. We didn't need fireworks to know it was real. We needed each other, and we showed up. Sometimes I catch her glancing at me the same way she did that first day, the quiet pull in her gaze, the half-smile that carries 1,000 words we never say aloud. And I know, without needing to, that we've earned every heartbeat of this strange, stubborn, beautiful thing between us. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?